ICC is proud to be a product launch partner for this new and exciting V2 generation of high-efficiency Intel Xeon E5 processors. The new architecture brings about a significant reduction in power consumption, increased performance per watt metrics, higher core count, and general microprocessor architecture enhancements. In preparation for the upcoming product launch date on September 10th, ICC prepared a range of Supermicro Intel C600 series chipset-based server platforms, fully compatible with and capable of taking advantage of the enhancements introduced by the Ivy Bridge efficient performance processors. A brief look at the V2 processor specs makes it clear. A 12-core Xeon E5 V2 CPU chip is a no-brainer when building a modern virtualization farm or a high-performance HPC cluster. With this product line, ICC offers most extensive selection of solutions for modern data center, enterprise IT, cloud computing, and HPC environments. For more information, please visit us at www.icc-usa.com.
This is Server Talk with Alexi and Mike, helping demystifying computing so you can make the best decisions in your business.
Welcome to another episode of Server Talk. I'm Mike. I believe we're on episode 7. And today we've got Andrew Brant and James Vogeltanz on from Intel to tell us about the new Intel Xeon E5 version 2 processor. For the most part, you know me, I'm not much of a tech guy, so I'm going to let these two tech geeks take it away. All right, James, can you tell us a little bit about this Intel Xeon E5 version 2?
Yeah, so let me give you an overview of the new Intel Xeon processor E5 version 2. So we have new series of Xeon E5 processors for our dual socket platforms and even some 4-socket platforms. The current version, Intel Xeon processor E5, or the version 1, the series has been in the market since middle of 2012. And this new CPU, version 2, is a drop-in replacement upgrade for existing platforms with the one caveat of a BIOS upgrade to support the new microprocessor. Primarily, the Intel Xeon processor E5 is made up of the 2600 series, which is our mainstream 2-socket platforms that bulk of the Xeon E5 processors go into. There's also 2 other product lines, or actually 3 others. There's the E5-2400 series and the E5-4600 series. Those version 2 CPUs will be launching early in 2014. But the product announcements here in Q3 of 2013 are focused on the E5-2600 series version 2 that support our dual socket platforms.
Oh, that's great. So generally speaking, where do Xeon E5s fit in?
So for most customers, the Intel Xeon processor E5 fits into their data center, running a majority of data center workloads ranging anywhere from workstations that might be sitting at an engineer's side where they're doing computer-aided drafting or simulation, all the way to general purpose servers that power the bulk of the internet, web servers, in addition to running big data solutions, virtualization cluster solutions, as well as database, enterprise resource planning, and a multitude of other business applications in the data center.
And what would be the main difference between E5s and E3s?
Yeah, so the main differences between the E5 and E3 is Intel Xeon processor E3 supports single CPU servers only and workstations. And so for customers that are maybe a small business getting into their first server, they'll utilize a Intel Xeon E3 server to support growing workload where they want the enterprise class features in a server, so something that's more robust than a desktop system or a notebook to run their business. However, if a customer is growing their business and they need performance to scale and more I/O capability and memory capacity, then the Xeon E5 processor supports up to 2 CPUs in a system. In addition, from a memory standpoint, you've got essentially 4 times the memory bandwidth. Intel Xeon E3 processor supports 2 memory channels per CPU, whereas the Intel Xeon processor E5 supports up to 4 memory channels per CPU. And then, of course, having 2 CPUs in a system, you'd have 8 channels of memory versus just 2 in a single-socket Xeon E3 processor-based system. In addition to that, from an I/O perspective, each CPU from Intel Xeon Processor E5 standpoint has more than double the I/O bandwidth from the PCI Express interface standpoint versus the Intel Xeon Processor E3. So for performance workloads and I/O intensive workloads, then customers will quickly want to move up to the Intel Xeon E5 processor to support those demanding workloads.
Okay, James. So what about the fact that this is version 2? How does it compare to version 1 of the E5?
So the Intel Xeon Processor E5 version 2 is what we call platform compatible with the previous version, or you can think of it as a version 1. So the motherboards that the CPUs plug into and the socket that it plugs into are the same as the systems that are shipping today. However, like I mentioned before, those systems will require a BIOS upgrade in order to support the new CPU. So from a platform perspective, when you look at the memory and the I/O, things are largely the same. The one exception being that the new Intel Xeon Processor E5 V2 does support a slightly faster memory speed. It supports DDR3 1866 megahertz memory, whereas the previous version only supported up to 1600 megahertz speed on the memory. So there is an improvement there of about 6% performance improvement realized by moving up to a faster memory speed. The other main difference is at the CPU level itself. Previously, the CPU supported up to 8 cores at the high end of the product line, and now with the Intel Xeon Processor E5 version 2, the top end of the SKU lineup supports up to 12 cores per CPU, so that's 50% more cores at the higher end of the stack. But even at the middle price points and lower price points of the SKU lineup, you're going to receive essentially 2 more cores at a similar price point, or at a minimum, the same number of cores, but faster frequency at a similar price point as what you had before with the previous version of the Intel Xeon Processor E5.
Sounds amazing. What about the power consumption?
So yeah, in addition to that, we're moving to a new process technology with the Intel Xeon Processor E5 version 2, going to 22 nanometer technology from a manufacturing standpoint. So what that does allow is lower idle power consumption and improve power efficiency. So at an idle power, when the system's not running or being lowly utilized, we see up to 30% less idle power at a CPU level. So obviously there's cost savings realized by that. But even when you're running the system, and hopefully if you're buying a server, you're utilizing it most of the time, because you're receiving either more frequency or more cores at the same power levels as before, you'll see marked improvement in power efficiency as well. So the TDPs, or thermal design point, of the CPUs remain the same as before. There's different power levels ranging from, all the way down to the low power SKUs at 40, 50 watts all the way up to 130 watts, and different power levels in between at 95 and 115 watts. So those same power levels remain the same with version 2, except you're receiving more cores or more frequencies at those same power points as the previous generation.
So where do 2400s and 4600 series fit in?
Yes, so there are other product lines within the Intel Xeon Processor E5 family. One of those is called the 2400 series. So the 2400 series also supports up to 2 processors in a system. The difference being between the 2400 and the 2600 series is that the 2400 series has fewer memory channels per CPU. So similar to the Intel Xeon Processor E3, it's got 3 memory channels per CPU versus 4 on the 2600 series, whereas the Intel Xeon Processor E3 has just 2 memory channels per CPU, so it kind of slots there in between. But the difference being the 2400 series can scale up to 2 CPUs per system. So for customers that are looking for a value 2-processor system and don't need all the performance of the 2600 series, that is where the 2400 series fits into the product line. The version 2 of that family will be launching in early 2014, along with the version 2 of the 4600 series, the Intel Xeon Processor E5 family. And now the 4600 series is altogether different. From a CPU perspective, it looks very similar to the 2600 series, the only difference being it will support up to 4 CPUs in a system versus being limited up to 2. So we have customers that need to scale performance beyond 2 sockets, but we also have an Intel Xeon processor E7 family, which scales even further from 4 to 8 sockets and beyond. But the 4600 series is our entry-level 4-socket server platform built on the same architecture as our 2600 series and the E5 family. And again, that CPU will be launching in early 2014 as well.
Cool. James, where do you think is going to be the greatest impact, and where do you think we're going to see the most ROI?
Yeah, so when we look at the different workloads that are primarily supported in the dual socket space today that's supported by the Intel Xeon processor E5 family, if you look at very different workloads ranging from Java workloads to database to virtualization and technical computing, all of those different workloads are going to see a pretty large advantage going from previous version of Xeon E5 to the version 2 that's launching here in the third quarter. I think the biggest gains you're going to see are in areas like Java performance and virtualization performance, where you're going to see 30 to 40% gains in performance over the previous generation. And then at the lower end of the scheme, we're going to see performance gains up to 25%. Some of the other workloads that maybe not scale as well with this architecture. So in total, you're going to see a good performance gain by gaining the 2 additional cores or 4 additional cores versus the previous generation, and the increased frequency. And the performance range is going to be anywhere from 20 to 40% generation to generation. But the biggest ROI that we see on the workloads that we've measured is going to be in the area of virtualization and Java performance.
Gotcha. James, can you tell us how having a new CPU will help you get the most out of your software?
Good point. Good question. So getting or upgrading your CPUs to the latest generation will help you get the most out of your software in a couple different ways. One is if you're simply running the existing software stack as it is written today, and it happens to scale well with cores, then obviously by adding additional cores to the same type of workload, you're going to get that additional performance scaling of 20 to 30% just by adding the additional cores. And even beyond that, typically every enterprise application scales well with frequency. So if you're simply adding more frequency, which you'll get with the Intel Xeon processor E5 version 2, then you'll see the gains achieved by adding the additional frequency at a similar price point as to what you were purchasing before with the previous generation. One of the biggest gains we see from an ROI perspective in the software space is if customers are running on hardware that's maybe 3 to 5 years old, where they haven't invested in new hardware in quite some time. Oftentimes, if customers can upgrade their software in addition to their hardware at the same time, for instance, maybe upgrading an older version of Windows to a newer version of Windows. A lot of times there's optimizations in the newer versions of software for the latest versions of the Intel Xeon processor. So in addition to just getting the raw performance gains that comes with the cores and frequencies, by upgrading the software, a lot of times there's optimizations that Intel's worked with the ISVs and OSVs to optimize their software stack for the latest version of our architecture. Instead of just achieving that 20 to 30% improvement, you may see something more than that due to the optimizations involved in software for the Intel architecture.
All right, James, I think that's it for episode 7 of Server Talk. We want to thank you so much for joining us all the way from Intel. And to our audience, I hope you learned a lot about the E5 version 2. So take it easy.
This has been Server Talk with Alexi and Mike. For more information on anything related to servers, please visit www.icc-usa.com.